Stories are powerful. If we let God's story get into our hearts, and if we bring our own stories to God's story, we'll grow closer to God. Today, we're going to think about how to link your life to the story you're telling. We'll make that link to Mark's account of Jesus calming the storm.
Have you been in a storm? Or in a situation where you had no control and things got really scary? Have you ever felt strong winds, maybe winds of opposition or fear, crashing around you? What did you do? Did you cry out to Jesus for help? How did Jesus help you? How did you respond to Jesus when the danger was past? What did he say to you?
Until you find a connection between your own life and a Bible story you're trying to tell, you won't be able to tell it with authenticity. If you find a connection a Bible story has to your own life, it will be easier to learn it, and you'll be able to tell it with passion.
Today's story, from the end of Mark chapter 4, is about what happened after Jesus was preaching in Peter's boat all day. It was a long day of preaching and teaching from this floating pulpit, as a huge crowd sat along the shore, perhaps in a bowl-shaped grassy valley.
Listen to the story and imagine that you're one of his disciples, or maybe just someone who has come to listen.
Later that day, when evening came, Jesus said to them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." And they left the crowd and took him in the boat just as he was. Other boats followed along. Gale-force winds arose, and waves crashed against the boat so that the boat was already filling up with water. But Jesus was in the rear of the boat, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?" And Jesus got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind settled down. And there was a great calm. Jesus asked him, "Why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?" And they were overcome with awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
When have you been afraid that if you followed Jesus more closely, like if you were to go where he tells you to go and do what he tells you to do, you might get into a scary situation like that? What did you feel as you watched this story? Sometimes a link doesn't occur to us right away. We'll say more at the end of this lesson about how to find those links.
For now, let's begin to learn this story by forming some good mental pictures of what happened.
First, let's picture where it started. There's a spot along the shore of Lake Galilee, which is traditionally called Sower's Cove. Scientists have tested the cove and found that 5,000 people could comfortably hear what someone was saying from a boat anchored offshore. Perhaps Sower's Cove is the very spot where Jesus taught the crowd that day.
Mark records a number of parables Jesus taught that day, including the parable of the sower, which are about faith and about the growth of God's kingdom. It must have been exciting being with a big crowd and hearing Jesus teach. But there are some mysteries in this story. What does it mean they left the crowd and took him with them in the boat, just as he was?
Perhaps Mark was showing us that the disciples just picked up the oars and started to row away from the crowd. But why does Mark tell us that the other boats followed?
It sounds like he was letting us know that there were other witnesses to this story. It wasn't just the men in the boat with Jesus who were scared by the gale-force wind and then suddenly felt the wind settle down.
Maybe your listeners will feel like one of those people. Perhaps they'll be able to identify with the people who were following Jesus, but at a distance. So don't forget to include that there were other boats following them on the lake. That may be the part of the story that will create a link into someone else's personal story.
Next, those gale-force winds begin to blow. Lake Galilee is surrounded by hills, and as the winds from various directions flow down into the bowl of the lake, windstorms can arise very quickly. This was a windstorm, not a rainstorm, and these winds must have been unusually strong. At least 4 of Jesus' disciples were professional fishermen, and they were terrified that they would drown.
If the Bible translation you use says that the boat was being swamped and your listeners wouldn't understand what that means, it's fine to say that the boat was filling up. When a boat gets swamped, it's so filled with water that it sinks. So even if you were a good swimmer, if you were out there on the lake at night, you thought your boat might sink, no wonder those disciples were scared. Understanding all of these things and finding that personal link helps us get a clear picture in our minds of what happened and how it felt.
And that helps us tell the story with confidence, as if we were there. Then our listeners will feel like it's happening right in front of their eyes.
Now that we've heard and studied this story, here's your assignment. Spend some time in a quiet place meditating on this story. Read it slowly or watch the story on the website. Allow yourself to remember what it felt like when you were scared. Ask God to speak to you through this story. Then, keep that personal link in mind as you plan your telling.
Use everything you've learned to recreate the story with your voice, your face, your body. Remember, if your phone can take movie clips or still pictures, you can post clips or pictures on the website of you telling it. And if you wish, you can post about your personal link to the story. What is Jesus speaking to you through this story? How will you respond?
When you're confident you can tell this story well, come back to the website and download video 8, The Healing of Bartimaeus. Until next time, tell it.